And now to introduce our first speaker of the morning. To begin, we have past Southern Region President and Meadows Award winner, Dr. David Creech, the director of Stephen F. Austin University Gardens and Professor Emeritus. Today, he will be presenting tips and tricks for propagating difficult to root species.
Okay, well, thank you, Bree. A few words first. I'd like to thank Bree and Cheryl for holding my hand on this Zoom conference. This is not what I really wanted. We all want to be together. We all want to enjoy each other in the halls and conversations, but it is what it is. Appreciate the opportunity to visit with the membership. I'm so sad that we are not in a real conference, but virtual will have to work. This is tips and tricks for propagating difficult to root species. Normally I'm doing plant materials because that's what we do here at SFA Gardens. And for those of you that don't know where we're at in Nacogdoches, Texas, and that's how you spell it. Basically, I'm in Deep East Texas, Zone 8B. It's the piney woods of East Texas. So we have acid soils. This is our staff at SFA. We have 128 acres, and actually we're losing one right now as a result of some budget cuts. So we'll pass the hat at the end of it. We don't pass candy, we pass a hat around. This is a terrific staff that are dealing with, this is pre-COVID, last March or last February. We still have students, and this is pre-COVID, so they're not in mass and they're not spatially distanced, but we have some wonderful students right now that are dealing with the kinds of things that we're all having to go through with in academia. This is last fall's plant sale. This was 500 or 600 people. And now we're basically doing bubbles, and it's a hybrid and it's virtual and everybody has to sign up. And we go, instead of 6 hours, 8-hour plant sale, we're having to go for about a 1 month plant sale, 3 sessions a day. And it's working, but it certainly isn't as much fun. Children, we had a great environmental education program until COVID hit. We went from 12,000 students to 0 right now, and that looks like something we're going to have to face for quite a while. The lecture series has been canceled, mainly for the inability to do social distancing. And our plant giveaway is gone, and basically we don't do Zoom, we don't do our lectures virtually because so many of our participants are senior citizens and are just not that enthusiastic about it. What I miss about IPPS is this. I love the talks, but getting together and talking plants and having a good time is really, I think when we do get together, we're all going to appreciate it that much more. And what a treasure trove of opportunity for all of us to get to know the movers and shakers, and Todd Lazane, Don Shadow, Alex, and Mike Durr. What a great joy it is to be able to connect. For my students, 20, 30 years of jumping in a van and heading out and bringing back a load of plants and some trees until we fill them out. I almost had to send students home by bus. We had so many cool plants. And a great opportunity here to showcase at SFA Gardens some of the plant material. There's one of our hydrangea paniculatas BL series there that kind of took the world by storm. Propagation, everything starts here, and having students means you have experiments, and it's given us an opportunity to really lay out a lot of different trials, and each student has different types of species. They have different rooting hormones, different substrates, different timings. There's no cookbook on propagating, and one of the things, that's actually a handout that I made about 30 years ago, factors that influence successful rooting. If you think you just stick it in a flat and turn on the mist and leave, it's not really there. There's a huge number of variables, into the trillions if you think about it, but species, some root, some don't. Stock plant, I'm a big believer that the quality of the stock plant is critical. What kind of cutting? Big, large, soft, hardwood, semi-hardwood? Timing, that's inevitable. When do you do timing? how do you do timing? Temperature, light, substrate, how you deal with your mist and your water chemistry. Time to roots, some take 6 months, some take 1 week, and you're off and running. Hormones, a mixed bag. We do a lot of work with hormones here on rooting. Photoperiod, leaf surface area, diseases, and sanitation. Biophilia is usually not listed, but I listed it because that's a connection of humans to plant material. And one of the observations I've made over all these years is that it's people that determine how to root things. This is an ancient photograph, really, of Lynn Lowry, who was one of my mentors way back in the 1970s, really, and 80s. And that's in Mexico, and that's Scutellaria supertescens pink, the very first one pulled out of Mexico. And he taught me a lot. That goes back to, this is embarrassing, that actually goes back to real cans. I'm pre-plastic, so that's part of it. For many, many years, and this is actually in the proceedings, 1996, I've used Carl's top 10 points for successful cutting propagation, and we still do. It applies. There's been some nuances and little tweaks to it, but increasing light intensity for sun lovers is a part of good rooting. We now believe in adding nutrients in the mist process, in the propagation process. We're not so sure how early you need to do it, but it is important. Direct sticking of cuttings, if you have the opportunity and have confidence, go ahead and direct stick so you can avoid moving things around. Proper care and nutrition of the stock mother plants plays a big role. Rooting with softwood, if you can move in that direction, they're usually faster. They're a little tricky to handle in terms of moisture, but rooting with softwood cuttings can improve rooting percentages. Drainage. Deeper pots is part of it. Water chemistry. We have a lot of places in Texas that have water chemistry issues, particularly from deep wells. Too high a pH, too much sodium, too much calcium, particularly when you get into central and west Texas. When do you take a cutting? Air pruning of roots is part of it once that root system takes off, providing aeration, and finally rooting hormones. Mike Durr has done endless number of timing of cuttings and hormones, and his manual is full of all kinds of suggestions, tips, and tricks. And at this point, I'd like to say the biggest tip and trick for rooting difficult to root, never heard of before species, is to get on the phone and call people that know what they're doing. This is a picture of another mentor of mine, and that's Margie Jenkins, who we're going to visit with about later. And Margie made a huge impression on me in the 1980s. And there's Buddy Lee, and it looks like Buddy and I are both kind of well fed at this particular juncture. And Margie is slim, and what a loss for the industry, and what a beautiful lady. There she is with Karomo Shikaboo. She introduced SFA Gardens to Karomo Shikaboo, a really neat azalea. Charlie and some of the crowd when IPPS visited a few years ago. You don't have to have the best facilities in the world to root. And I always thought that Margie could root a fence post, but she had a touch, and she was constantly putting and waving her hand above the mist bed to see if that humidity felt pretty good. Kaime Parks at Camellia Forest used to do that. She did closed system, and she would run back to the greenhouse to check her humidity. So it's hard to teach that. It's hard to learn that, but the connection between the propagator and the plant is incredibly critical. While this looks a little rough to some of our state-of-the-art facilities, I have a great deal of admiration for the unusual plants, as well as the percent rooting that she was able to achieve. In Louisiana, Michael Richard, Buddy Lee, Alan Owings. Alan's standing next to a Grandview Gold Quercus virginiana that he really likes. And all of these three are really knowledgeable. In North Carolina, Leanne, Bree's been an incredible help. A lot of people don't know that Bree really, my first time I met Bree was at IPPS, if I remember right, on a tour, and she was in the propagation area. So she started her Her road to stardom was actually started in the prop bed. Martin Vander Giesen in Alabama, Tony Avent in North Carolina, both have forgotten more than I'll ever know about rooting plants, and their success shows. Rick Crowder and Todd Lezane, that's quite an old photograph. And Rick taught me a lot too when I did a sabbatical in North Carolina. He has really some excellent facilities and was an avid propagator. Jim Barry at J. Barry Nursery has started his career at Greenleaf Nursery as a propagator. And all good things start in propagation. If you can't get your propagation down, the rest of it just falls apart. It's the starting gate. And near and dear friend who started my adventure in the garden world and in horticulture in so many ways is J.C. Ralston. And his impact is still felt today. Sherwood Akins was blessed by the Lord, and he could root a fence post. He taught me how to root Japanese maples. He was in Sibley, Louisiana, and he's the father of Zydeco Twist, one of the Tupelos. And I was just really mesmerized. He was quite a propagator, roughest looking house that you've ever seen, but he could root everything because he was blessed by the Lord. And rooting percentages were high, plant quality was good. He had a connection. I do want to have a shout out to a lot of my friends in China. If there's any on here today, I really appreciate all the lessons I've learned. I've learned a lot more from China than I have from here. And this is an old photograph in the late 1990s when I was first visiting China with ball cypress and some of the hybrid work that they're doing there, and also propagating clones. And at that time, we basically run seedlings across the United States with a few grafted varieties, and there's probably about 100 of them now. But the Chinese, with young clones and proper technology, were rooting them they're actually rooting them in the millions, and they do direct stick, and their percentages are high. And I learned a lot about rooting taxodium from my colleagues in China. What about species? Some are easy, some are not. There's a juvenile wood and adult wood aspect of it, and then there's a zone of juvenility. That's an old concept that if you have a seedling tree, that gets to be an adult, that there is a zone of juvenility, usually low down in the trunk, and any epicormic tissue that arises from there is going to have juvenility and thus ease of rooting. Now, rooting a petunia is different than rooting an ancient tree. And so there's the big one at Oaxaca, the Arbole de Tule, the Montezuma cypress. And basically, that's that adult versus juvenile. On the left is the senator, which is no longer exist. It was burned down many years ago by a young lady. And there's the Arbole de Tule. We have no choice. These are adults. You have to go with grafting. We've tried. We actually have had wood from Mexico on some of our expeditions from this tree, and it can't be rooted. It has to be grafted. The seedling of an adult, of course, carries the genetics, but it also is different than the original mother tree. This is a seedling that we selected in Mexico at Oaxaca, and that's at Texas A&M with Dr. Meng Meng Gu, and that's one I snuck on the campus of Tulane. And it's a little bit like me. It's undisciplined. It has a tendency not to want to make a leader. It wants to make a very, very large tree quick. That tree in Tulane is probably another 10 feet taller. It's a very, very fast growing tree. But the young seedling trees have a greater propensity to root. Oaxaca Child is the seedling of the big one. We get roots on it in 8 weeks. It's extremely vigorous. It's less than graceful form, but if you're looking for a fast growing tree, one concept is topophysis and plagiotropic growth. And that's that if you have an upright shoot, those are going to be upright cuttings. This side branch can be a real problem in the industry, particularly with conifers. So trying to cut back your mother trees so you can get as many upright shoots as is one thing that we do on a lot of our conifers, and having mother plants and stock plants that fit that mode can improve your percentages. Topophysis and plagiotropic growth, plant propagation. And there's a Jim's little guy, which is a dwarf, grows about a foot a year. And if you look at that cutting on the right, that shoot on the right, if you root that, and it roots pretty easy, you can get a very quick growing, fast erect plant. Health and stock vigor of that stock plant is important. The T406, we named it Lanana. We cut back all of our mother trees to get this good thick wood and hope to get roots in 8 to 12 weeks, and we're off and running. Timing, you can do your timing on crepe myrtle just about any way you want, but if you're doing Japanese maples, we did quite a bit of research with Japanese maples in the late 1990s, and cutting back that plant helps, and getting up there in early June, late May, and trying to get vigorous wood, getting not thin twiggy wood, had a lot to do with our success. Success in this case was not as good as we'd like. Some clones of Japanese maple and the other maples root rather easily. Some do not. And we learned that we could easily get 20, 30% on some of the himes, the little toadstool types. And we would make that a part of a research project in the classes. So when we were doing classes, and when a lot of faculty do classes in plant propagation, it's important to have success. I agree. Make sure your students are seeing roots and seeing quick 100% percentages. But failure is not really a failure. It's a learning experience. So with all of the stock plants that we have, we've done a lot of clonal rooting, trying to root different clones of the maple world. Now, this is a sad picture in a way. This is Quercus virginiana. This is the golden live oak, and we've had it for a few years here at SFA, and we're grafting it really, but I did root some, and they were part of our original wood, and that sad little root system ended up being a small tree that we've shared with some of the other gardens. If I can root it, I'd rather not graft it. It's just too tedious. It takes too long, and rooting can speed up things if you get it right. Alan thinks I'm in love with Quercus insignis, and really I have learned how to root it, and it's this wood, this new growth here will root, provided you get it in on time and have some lights on it. But giving it a little bit of a jump. Quercus insignis is kind of a holy grail. It has an acre in the size of it's the size of a softball actually. And so when I'm in Texas, and we believe in that. I'm still failing. Some of you may send me a text if you would on Mahonia gracilis. I've got cut back plants. I still haven't gotten very good. I've rooted it, but not at any percentages. So it's the difficult to root species that presents the challenge. Keep moist all the way to the mist bed. That's our towel technique at SFA. It's a wet towel. We throw 20 cuttings in there, throw a label in there, and start rolling it. And then we carefully unroll it when we get back to the head house. We don't just whip it out and throw it in the air. I've seen that happen. Students are confused on the value of keeping track of things. If you're really confident on your material, direct sticking does help. Direct sticking of cuttings improves plant performance. So with blueberries, we do quite a bit of vaccinium work here at SFA. We have cut back plants. We get vigorous wood in June, and we'll stick 2 cuttings in a 4-inch pot. And we know that we don't have to do any transplanting later on. We can move it directly into a bigger can. Looking for the best root system as quickly as possible is part of it. I'm working with a wonderful young lady with kiwis, and this is our golden kiwi fruit, which is an interesting plant. And Lais is from Brazil, and she's taken to our kiwi fruit effort here in a lot of ways. And we've improved our rooting ability with it dramatically. There are some of our kiwis. This is part of the problem, is the callus balls, and many propagators can talk about that. And what do you do with that? Do you redip? Do you slice it? Do you shave it off? And you're just trying to get root systems that break out of that callus ball. And basically, we have come to the opinion with actinidia that it's really the nature of the stock plant and the particular clone involved. Rooting hormones, mixed bag, sometimes helpful, some not. Uh, Basically, we can use a liquid using KIBA in our particular case here at SFA. You can use a talc, and we've moved into looking at a lot of these brand new gels. I like the gels. I think they stay on better. And we've had some pretty good luck with gels. I don't know. KIBA may have burned in this particular case. It's a couple of years old. When we did a good replicated trial and trying to get up to that 80-90% rooting that makes it economic. Substrate, we use in containers. We use a lot of root pruning containers just to provide the additional aeration mainly. But we also know that if you have a slow rooter, if you're looking at 10, 12, 14, 16 weeks, you really need to have a lighter mix because it gets denser and denser and more soupy as time goes on. So we like to use a lighter mix, not 100% perlite, but getting pretty close in deeper cavity trays. We do these in the head house, and there's Bree looking at one of our cephalotaxuses. There's a Carl Whitcomb originated the air pruning, and in this particular case, we got oak seedlings, but we do a lot of air pruning containers and flats as well. Substrates, we've tried everything from coarse to fine, pine bark, perlite, everything. I think it's as long as you have the aeration, the substrate is whatever your cost can bear and whatever you can look at there. Air pruning of roots is beneficial, and that not just that, it's also the additional air around the root system. A myriad of choices that you can make. We like deep because we stick an inch and you still know that you're not going to have a soupy mix at the base of that cutting, which can be tragic in so many ways. Nutrition is a mixed bag in the propagation area. It can result in a quicker and healthier liner, slow release or solubles. The question we always ask is we're using solubles is when do we start? Do you start when you stick the cutting? Do you do it once a week if you're using solubles? Do you do it in the early evening when the mist is off? Do you inject in the mist? When do you start this process of providing some nutrition? Do you do foliar? I have no real opinion on any of that other than the fact that we do need to jumpstart those cuttings as quickly as possible. And the minute there's a decent root system, we like to move them out of the mist into frequent watering as best we can. Mist, there's all kinds of mist systems that are out there, and the goal of all of them is pretty much the same. It's, how are you going to do your frequency and what is your duration going to be? And so Tony Avent in the early days was using Robert Spinner sprinklers. I remember that distinctly, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. He did not have a fancy mist system. This is Margie Jenkins, who was using a Spinner type sprinkler on it as well. Mark Bronstad at Doremus was using a spinner and is coming on every 20 minutes. And he was constantly checking if he needed to bump it up a little bit. Different types of heads, they're all out there. There's lots and lots of choices, but providing that moisture preventing wilting on a sunny day versus a cloudy day, that's a part of biophilia, really your connection with the plant. So on sunny days, we kind of shut down a little bit increase the frequency. And on cloudy days, we try to, sprinkle a little bit less mist. If you have a very tricky species, and I really admire people hammering 80%, 90% on Magnolia grandiflora, you've got to be pretty good to do it. But maintaining that high humidity cloud with these netophemes here is really a success story, and good aeration around the root systems and patience, lots and lots of patience. Water chemistry is tricky. Some of us are working off of deep wells. Some of us are working off of surface water sources, which are generally a superior. But in Texas, we have some serious well issues where sodium values can be over 100 parts per million, pHs can be high. You can adjust the pH, you certainly can do that, but you have a difficult time dealing with high conductivity. So when you have salt sensitive plants like vaccinium, you really need to have some kind of system to deal with that, whether dilution is a solution, having a surface source and pumping into it from a well, I don't know, but get your irrigation water quality in front of you and understand what it means, whether it's calcium, magnesium, bicarbs, carbs, all of that has an impact on the rooting. This is a constant shower over these plants, and those ions and that conductivity can have an impact. This is my original time clock from so many years ago. And I really like it because it actually worked all the time. And but you know, most of us have moved to some kind of system that gives us a little bit more control and a little bit more expensive. But Phytotronic is one that we're using now. If you live in an area, and we do, and it might happen today, if I black out, it's because of the latest hurricane rolling into Louisiana. But we're using quite a few battery operated controllers, even when we have electricity failures, and we're doing battery backup. But we find them to be pretty cheap, $100, and they're dependable. They're immune to electrical services, and they're pretty low breakdown on electric, and they're pretty low cost. And the problem with them is they'll go forever with the battery, but if they're on a mist, they goes a little bit less time. And so just having a checklist once a week, we check the battery warning on it. And if it's low, we'll replace that battery, and you have 30 seconds to change the battery, and you don't lose your settings on it. But gets you away from having to worry about electricity and keeping that mist going when you want it, and dealing with daylight savings time is a little bit of a difference here and there. But timing of your mist and how you take care of that plant is part of it. If you have a high light plant, you like light, plant appreciates being in full sun. The most light that you can get on it has an impact as well. Shade lovers is a little bit different, but I learned a lot in China on taxodium. And you know, when this nursery had over 2 million taxodium cuttings stuck in a community beds, really what it is. And they were big believers in getting as much sunlight down to that, because it's still photosynthesizing, it's still creating energy. And, you know, they could protect from hail, and they could protect from the hottest and sunniest days. So I was really, really impressed with the rooting percentages and the success they were having with many of the new hybrid clones that we're trying to introduce here at SFA. Photoperiod interruption. This got me in a little bit of trouble with safety, so I put it in here. And this is not what you're supposed to do, but we did have ground fault. But keeping your light bulbs out of mist is critical. But having that light come on, and 75-watt bulb, and then there's all kinds of propagation bulbs that we can use today that increase not just the foot candles, but also the, the wavelengths that we like to use. But having it within 6 feet, coming on for an hour in the middle of the night is a good idea. Photoperiod interruption encourages growth. Keep in mind that in the fall, when you're making cuttings, that plant is setting itself up for dormancy, and you're trying to fool that plant. You're wanting to think it's springtime and it needs to go. And so actinidia is kind of critical here. It wants to go dormant. This is a golden kiwi fruit. And if you put it under lights, and we're trying to root in September, October, and November, you can trick that plant a little bit into busting a bud, and then which is critical to getting some roots going as well. So the health of that plant, the stock plant, but photoperiod interruption on some species is really, really important. I have no experience with the effect of different shade coverings on it. This is at Grandiflora many years ago. I just like this slide, and I don't know if anybody is doing this. We never have. We have used Illuminate, and we like Illuminate. And basically, it has a diffused light, so we appreciate that. Temperature. We like to run hot, and we think it speeds up the rooting process. And our system is copied. I have to give Ted Stevens credit for this because I visited Ted. I visit him every now and then, and it always amazes me his hot water, kind of a homemade system that he did there. And you need to be a master plumber to figure out how he connected everything together. But he's using a hot water heater and bottom heat to drive that temperature up, and basically runs a river of water underneath underneath his flats. We do the same thing. Sometimes we have problems. I don't know who designed that at SFA, but we use a hot water heater, and we basically have created a river that goes underneath it. And essentially what we end up with is water going out at about 100, looks like 115 degrees, and it coming back in, and it'll kick on at about 85 degrees and drive it back up. So we like to run in the 90s, even though the Tygon type tubing that we use beneath it is resistant to a lot of heat. We never have had any problems with it getting too hot, even though it's coming in at 115. That flat is above it, and the tip of the cutting is above that, the bottom of the flat. And one of the things that we've learned over all the years is that we would like to have a continuous river. We've tried tees, we've tried different approaches to this, but we basically come in, but we do alternate. So it's kind of hard to figure out this design from this image, but it is, there is a madness. There's some kind of madness here, but we do get bottom heat that runs it up into the 90s below the flats, and the flats stay nice and warm. Our latest adventure is changing over to heated mist. We think nobody likes to jump in a cold shower. Our wintertime temperatures are running on water 65, 60 degrees. And so you're sitting there in the heat in a sauna, and then all of a sudden you have a cold bath. So heated mist is something that we've just actually kind of begun here. We do know that we don't get as much heat as the hot that we'd like to have, because it cools down every 10 minutes or 15 minutes. You get a little bit. So we're looking at a little different insulated pipe system that we can keep that mist at a pretty high level of heat. But again, having good heat in your rooted, trying to root things is a very important factor here. A river of warm water beneath the flats, warmer substrate temp in the winter, and keeping our temperatures checked all the time is part of it. There's also another aspect of temperature that I wanted to throw in here is chilling hours. And mainly we're interested in chilling hours because we're so far south, and we have high hopes that a lot of Denny Werner's material will actually grow here. Some of the red buds do, and some of them don't. And it has a lot to do with chilling. And so we track chilling quite a bit here. And this is a November 1 to March 1 model that we've developed here. And you can see in 2013, we could grow golden delicious apples. And in 2016-17, we had an exceptionally warm winter, and so many plants that have high chilling are expecting it and don't get it. And that really does influence rooting. If you're trying to pick a time when you're actually collecting cuttings in the winter, we like to collect up near, kind of watch that chilling that we're getting out there in the field, so that at least the scions that we're collecting, the cuttings that we're collecting, have accumulated enough chilling that they are kind of ready to go. If you're rooting early, they're confused. Photoperiod has a part of it, temperature has a part of it. So we're trying to decide all the time on certain species. Some of the hydrangea paniculatas, for instance, we do know we have chilling issues with them in the field. And we think, and we normally root those in June when they're rather easy, but that is an issue that we deal with. I'd like to thank you for your time. This has been a quick overview. I'll be glad to answer any questions. Having a good idea is one thing in propagation, and making it happen is another. And our mantra is that we do expect a miracle, and every now and then we get one. I sure do miss traveling. I know you do too. I wish we were all together at the conference, but this is the best that we can do. And come and visit us at SFA Gardens, and we'll make it a safe and educational trip. Thank you very, very much.
Our international sponsors, Ball Horticulture and Harrell's Fertilizer, and our North American sponsors, Bailey Nurseries, Bayer, ICL Osmocote, Nursery Supplies, Spring Meadow, and Star Roses and Plants. Your investment in IPPS is greatly valued and appreciated. Additional thanks to our Southern Region sponsors, Greenleaf Nursery Company, OHP, and Virginia Nursery and Landscape Association for your continued support.